Today, we're going to look at 3 concrete ways that we can apply knowledge of motivational processes to the work organization. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is job redesign. And here, the worker gets engaged by changing the relationship of worker to work. We're actually using work as a way of engaging the worker. The second is goal setting, and somehow, by publicly committing to goals, we get energized. And the third way is that old standby money, but we're also going to see why money often fails as frequently as it works. The first, as I said, is job redesign. And here we're going to spend our time exploring Hackman and Oldham's job characteristics model of job redesign. A bit about the model before we actually start to pull it apart and look at what goes into it. Hackman and Oldham drew upon the work of Herzberg, if we go back a few sessions ago, on job satisfaction, and particularly his notion that the work itself could be a motivator. Obviously, you can look around and you can see some people who throw themselves into the work. I've already tossed out a concept of making work like play. What is it about work that engages workers? What underlying components have to be there to draw us into work so that we don't want to put it down? We just want to stay with it. Well, Hackman and Oldham, if we take a look at the computer model, if we go to the model on the screen, suggest, first of all, that there have to be 3 psychological states present. The first of the states is experienced, and you can add to your own copies, experienced. Couldn't quite fit it in mine. Experienced meaningfulness of work. What this means is that this model, like so much else that we've discussed in class, is very perceptual. Well, what does it mean to experience meaningfulness in the workplace? That you're doing a job that you think is important, not trivial, that it's critical to what's going on in the organization. You are an important part. Your job is worthwhile. And in fact, you can experience this no matter what level you're at in an operation. I remember years ago in graduate school, a fellow student had to do a research project. And at the time, he was interviewing elevator operators. There was a time when elevators indeed used operators to get people from floor to floor. And these elevator operators at New York University, where I was attending, thought that their job was really key to the whole operation of the organization, because without them, you couldn't move mobs of people from one floor to the next. And here we were talking about not a campus spread out, but a vertical campus. It was concrete. It was high level. Elevator operators is seeing their job as being meaningful. You might not think about it, but all that it mattered is that these elevator operators thought that they did. So to see work as being meaningful. A second key component is experienced, and again, add in and underline experienced responsibility for outcomes. You've got to see some tie between what you're doing in the workplace and your outcomes, your rewards. What happens? Either your rewards or outcomes at work. And this goes back to, again, we can tie it into the notions that we talked about previously in terms of locus of control. Do you experience your life as being under your control or not? or some of the things that we talked about previously in terms of self-efficacy. Same kinds of concepts. So the notion to experience responsibility between what you're doing in the job and the outcomes of work. If you don't, then what you do on the job really doesn't matter, doesn't play a role in whatever the outcome is, whatever the final contribution to the product is, or maybe even, as we'll see later on when we look at ties between, links between performance and pay. It's not going to matter there either. And finally, knowledge of results. You need to know what your performance level is. And this is going to key in and be extremely important when we talk about performance appraisal. It's ideal if the job you're doing gives you feedback just from whatever it is you're doing. You know in sales, the job tells you you're doing it correctly. You know in sports, because you know whether you connect or not. Other areas are much fuzzier. You're going to be in management information systems. How do you know whether it works or not? And when do you take the measure as to whether it works or not? More complicated. Are people satisfied with it in the end, or do they pull the whole system out and say, sayonara? You don't want to wait to the end. Hopefully you need intermediate things to see if the system is giving you the performance that you want. Know if you're writing a program, if it crashes. You get information and feedback just from the activities that you're engaging in. So to the extent that you can design jobs so that there's feedback built into it, all the better. And we'll come back and say, you know, like, yeah, maybe there's some things we can do to some jobs to put that in. Another key component in this is core dimensions of work. Okay, now we know the psychological states that have to be achieved to engage workers in their job. What dimensions of work relate to these psychological states? Well, the first set of core dimensions talks about the skills and the tasks themselves. One aspect is skill variety. Does the job engage a number of skills? Are there multiple abilities that you need to use? Or is there only one ability at the other extreme which are going to be engaged in repetitively over and over and over and over again? Those that engage more skills are, as you can see, going to be less repetitive than those that engage a single skill. Another aspect is task identity. And this talks about the extent to which the job involves doing a whole piece of work versus a fragment of a piece of work. I think the best way to get a grasp on this is to think of the assembly line. On the assembly line, fragmented. You're going to do one part of the piece of work. You're going to be installing some component in a car again and again and again. You're working on an assembly line. Well, this would be an old-fashioned assembly line. No, not so old-fashioned, where you're sticking labels on bottles. And you're going to do that again and again and again over the course of the day. Now, it requires some skill because that bottle's going to be moving by and you've got to get, you know, that machine in place that sticks the label on just in the right way. And you want to make sure that, you know, it's not coming up too high so that it crumples, or too low or upside down or something like that. So it requires some skill. But limited skills and very repetitive. And finally, task significance. Does the job have impact on the lives of other people? Well, I can think of a job as an example, which is very significant. Skill variety is fairly low. Task identity is, I guess, complete in this case, but it's a very limited one. These are people, and they usually probably do something else as well, but these are the people in hospitals, the technicians, who are monitoring all the telemetry coming out of a coronary care unit. Okay, now the truth are bells and whistles that alert you, but somebody has to be there watching those screens to make sure that Mr. Jones's telemetry isn't suddenly signaling that he's going into fibrillation or something like that, or things have slowed down. So people who are monitoring telemetry of any sort, really important, okay, because you have to keep your attention level up, but it's not requiring too many skills. But in this case, there is real task significance because somebody's life depends on it. So here, what we have with this one aspect of the job characteristics model is compensation. If a job is low in one area, you can compensate for it being high in another area. It doesn't have to be high on all three to engage you. It can engage you by being really high on one and kind of insignificant on the other two. Okay, so one aspect of it. Another aspect in terms of core dimensions has to do with autonomy. And this relates directly into feeling responsible for outcomes. You have to have some ability to make decisions on the job to feel responsible for outcomes. If there is no decision you're responsible for, then you don't get any sense of autonomy, that there's any link between what you do and what the outcome is. And again, let's go to the assembly line as a prime example of what's happening. Not much room for decisions on assembly line, and not too much room on a very standard assembly line for feeling responsible for job outcomes. You're doing such a, fraction of the work, first of all. And there is no decision. I mean, how is what you're doing contributing to the final outcome of the whole product? Very often, it's hard to have any sense of how it contributes, because there's so little room for any kind of decision there. The equipment is mostly handling all of it, so you don't feel it. And the third thing is feedback. Feedback is really critical in knowing how you're doing your job. And we're going to come back to this notion of performance appraisal. That's important for somebody to come and give you feedback to tell you whether you're on target or not, so you can take some kind of corrective action. And again, if we go out, we use sports as an example. If you've got some error in the way, if you're in baseball, the way you're swinging, you may not know it. All you know is you're getting feedback, you're missing the ball. But then you need additional feedback for somebody to tell you that you're stepping into it maybe the wrong way, or you're choking up on the bat, or you're not, some way that you're holding the bat, or helping you timing in your swing. That feedback has to come from somebody else to tell you what to do. And the same thing on jobs. Need to take corrective action to better your performance. And to do that, feedback is utterly and completely essential. You can't correct your behavior in the absence of feedback, because you just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And somebody has to come and tell you what you don't know. Well, what do you get out of all of this? If we've got all of this cooking in a job, where does it take us? What are the results supposed to be? Well, the outcomes, Hackman and Oldham tell us, should be high intrinsic motivation. Remember, going back to Herzberg, the work itself was one of those intrinsic types of factors. So if you build these components into the job, you should wind up with high intrinsic motivation, as well as high job performance. Intrinsic motivation is up. You should want to keep at the job. You should be performing well. You should be productive if you've got these things going, because now you're so motivated, nobody can pull you away from work. You want to stay with it. You want to complete it. You want to do a good job. Along with that, there should be high job satisfaction. You should find the work gratifying and the achievements you get out of work satisfying. And finally, there should be low absenteeism and turnover. Is this the case? Well, I already suggested not necessarily, because it turns out that the model was too simple. People are complicated. Doesn't work for everybody. And why does it not work for everybody? There's some moderating variables, it turns out, that need to be attended to. The first and primary one is something called growth need strength. How important is the job for you? Is the job your venue, your avenue for realizing achievement and success? Is it a key part of your identification? Is that the way you realize a sense of development and growth, is through your accomplishments on the job? If you're one of the people who falls into that category, then the job characteristics model of job design will work for you. But what if that's not the case? What if work is not a central life interest for you? I'll go to work. I'll get the job done. I'll give you an honest day's work. Pay me. And don't give me all this empowerment decision business. Because there are other aspects in life that engage me, where I really find fulfillment, and it's not going to be the workplace. And there are plenty of people out there like that. It's not that they're not engaged in various aspects of life. Maybe it's the bowling league that engages them. Maybe it's in some volunteer organization. Maybe it's a magnificent flower garden or vegetable garden. But work just isn't going to be a central life interest. For people like this, it's not going to matter. You can put all of this in, and it won't really do an awful lot to spark their interest in the job. In that case, better to use some other way of motivating people. Maybe money would be the answer, and some way of tying money to performance, or maybe concentrating on some extrinsic factors. There are also two other things that feed into this. One is knowledge and skills. Doesn't matter what you do in terms of making the job really interesting if somebody doesn't have the knowledge and skills to do the job, just as we said with everything else in motivation, it's not going to work. And finally, satisfaction with extrinsic aspects of the job. If there are some extrinsic aspects of the job which are really distracting and dissatisfying to you, it's going to take away from performance on the job. Yes, you will have high intrinsic motivation, but your performance may suffer because of conflicts you're having with coworkers or superiors, or because you're so dissatisfied with pay everybody else got a raise and you didn't. Okay, something is really bothering you. Or everybody else got new computers and you didn't. And that's really gnawing away at you. And so it will take away from performance. It's going to interfere with this operating. If you get satisfaction on the extrinsic aspects of the job, then the other aspect may not matter. And one of the things that, in fact, may not matter when a job is really fascinating and when you love the job is the working conditions, the physical working conditions. People who have their own startup industries can work out of a garage and work extraordinary hours because they're in the really exciting aspect of bringing one of their ideas to fruition into life. What drives the inventor to work those incredible hours to bring something off? It's the internal satisfaction of bringing one of your ideas essentially to birth, giving it life and seeing that it in fact works and has some value. So all of these things need to be in play in order for the model to work. Okay? And even then, we don't necessarily get all of the relationships that we'd like. Hackman and Oldham propose that you can actually come up with a motivating potential score for a job. And that is to take the first three factors, okay, and there are scores, there are questionnaires, there are surveys that you give to people to come up with actual numerical values for each of these things. People rate their jobs. So you get these three scores and you divide by 3 and then multiply it by a score in terms of which people perceive there's autonomy in the job and people perceive that there is feedback in the job. And so you can see that there's only one part of it that is compensatory, the first part. And after that, if there is very little autonomy or if there's very little feedback, this suggests that a job won't have much motivating potential for people. Well, is this the case? Let's think for a minute about jobs that you think are exciting. You know, what would be a job that you would, if you could, really like to do? And let's explore what aspects of it might make it interesting to see whether or not this model has any validity. John, we were talking earlier about some job that you had hoped to get. You want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I was aspiring to be a pilot in the Air Force, so I think that's pretty exciting.
What about being a pilot makes it exciting? What about it would engage your interest in the job and make you want to be a pilot?
The fact that you get to make decisions like instantaneously. Like they say the pilot only works about maybe two hours a day when everyone else is working 6 or 7. But they say that you put the 6 or 7 hours in the 2 hours. You know, you make all the decisions you have to and all that stuff.
Right. Okay. If we pull it apart and look at it according to Hackman and Oldham's model, is there skill variety there? Oh yeah, I would think. Okay. There's a lot of things that you have to be doing in order to fly a plane. Okay. You're monitoring a lot of stuff. You're engaging in a lot of decision making. And there's some physical skills that it involves as well. So yes, a lot of skill variety goes into that. Does it have task identity? Do you do a job from beginning to end?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, you have to.
You get it up and you got to get it down. You don't want to be lost in space out there. So it has that aspect as well. And what about task significant? Okay, does it impact people's lives?
If you fly like commuter planes and stuff like that.
Sure, it impacts people's lives. I mean, you've got them up there. Okay, you're the person who's now seen responsible for their lives. Okay, when there is some problem, you always look at the role of the pilot in all of this. So, I mean, you are the commander at that point. Sure, okay, and did you ever watch people when a plane doesn't take off, even if it's bad weather? Okay, are they upset? Mm-hmm. Okay, it has a real impact on people's lives. So it comes up high on all 3 of those. Okay, what about autonomy? Okay, do you see any relationship there between things that you do on the job and job outcomes? Is it very evident to you? Do you have decision making? Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, and feedback? Yep.
Performance is your feedback. Yeah.
Performance is your feedback. Okay, you're getting all kinds of information coming back at you, telling you you're on course, you're not on course. You know, if you get the plane up, it's up, and if you get the plane down, it's down, and corrective actions that you have to take. So all of that is, and you're getting feedback as you're performing the job. It's coming to you. Okay, and to a certain extent, you rely on telemetry, but I've talked to people who are engineers, and I suspect some of it happens with really experienced pilots as well, that they talk about the seat of the pants feeling that you get in doing this, that you develop some internal indicators for how things feel. And so you're getting that feedback as well. So if we look at pilot, it's got all of these built in. And so we can see that there is validity to the model, that there is application. What about the opposite end of the spectrum? Are there some jobs out there that are so boring, okay, that you'd almost rather watch paint dry than to have to engage in this job? I think, Daniel, you had something in mind.
Yeah, I think it's working security.
Have you worked security?
Did it for a week.
A week didn't last very long. Okay, so let's pull things apart and see where we are. Did it require much in the way of skills?
Staying awake.
Staying awake, okay. And breathing. Okay, did you do a job from beginning to end?
It's not, yeah, you have to pay attention, I guess that's
You have to pay attention. What if there was some breach of security? Were you actually involved in trying to apprehend somebody?
No.
No, so you're really not doing the whole job. All you're doing is the monitoring part of it, then you're not doing the really exciting part of it, which is the apprehension part of it. Okay, so it's not full task identity. Task significance?
Yes, I think there
Yeah.
is large significance in doing that.
Yeah, there is task significance, except sometimes the other parts of it are so overwhelming, boring, that you sort of forget that people's lives may depend on it. Any autonomy?
In a sense.
You had some, but
I guess it's figuring out situations. It's almost like reading people at times too. 'Cause you have to watch people and figure out. I mean, it's your decision whether you're going to call someone out.
yeah, so there was some autonomy in there as to what you could do. Okay, how about feedback?
I didn't get any feedback.
No
I
feedback.
figured
Okay.
maybe if something happened and I was
Yeah.
responsible for an apprehension, maybe.
Okay, so much lower on all of these qualities. Yeah, I also thought one of them that's always occurred to me as one that I thought not too fascinating in life is, and that is a toll taker on a parkway or a tunnel. Truth is, when we get easy pass, those jobs are going to be phased out as well. So you begin to see that there is some validity to all of this, and that jobs can be designed to take advantage of this. Okay, we've been talking about individual jobs. No, go back. One more thing before we go. Okay, how do we implement all of this to make use of the concepts? One is to increase skill variety, combine tasks. Okay, this would also help task identity and task significance. What does this mean? Well, complete assembly of a product instead of partial assembly, or at least of part of a product. So maybe complete engine assembly as opposed to just doing a piece of engine assembly. And in fact, the automobile companies have gone to putting in much more complete assembly of components than was previously the case, so that they have moved in this direction. Grouping tasks into natural work units. Okay, and this would affect task significance and task identity. In this case, an example could be that a secretary would report to one department so that the secretary would be working with all similar types of reports, as opposed to working in a secretarial pool where you get a fragment of a report and you never get like a whole thing to do. Giving workers some kind of contact with customers, either internal or external, to the extent that you can build that in. And that goes back to a secretary working in a secretarial pool doesn't have contact with customers. Just gets a piece of something that needs to be transcribed, some report that needs to be done, has no idea who the person is who brought it in. But the secretary working in a department and actually reporting to different people has a lot of customer contact. And that builds in a number of things. It builds in things such as task significance. It builds in autonomy and feedback. So to the extent that you can build that into a job and give people some sense of somebody at the end actually using whatever your work is. Vertically loading jobs. This affects autonomy. Okay, vertically loading says that you're going to put higher skilled tasks into the work that somebody's doing, so that somebody who's doing assembly can now also do inspection to see if what they've completed is of quality. And an example of this, and one of the things where this certainly has been incorporated, is in automobile assembly, where workers can now stop the assembly line when something is done wrong. In years past, you would know that you've done something wrong, and that whole mistake moved on. And as many mistakes as you made, it moved on, and it was up to somebody else, management, to be responsible for inspection, and you hope that they caught it, but it wasn't your job. And then you develop a sense of, well, quality doesn't matter. Nobody cares what I do. Okay, so now by allowing you to stop the assembly line, you've vertically loaded and you've built autonomy back into it. And then opening feedback channels wherever you can. Giving people who are in sales a chance to actually review with customers their satisfaction. I think Saturn, the car company, is a good example of this, because before you leave that showroom, that salesperson goes through with you a whole questionnaire to find out how satisfied you are with various aspects of the whole sales process. But they don't wait until you go home. They do mail you a questionnaire afterwards. But there is immediate feedback right then and there to the salesperson. What could they have done to improve the process? I always think, too, that people who write programs and applications ought to work the help desk so that they can get direct feedback as to where it is unuser-friendly and too complicated. Find out problems with it. Fascinating thing was that somebody who was a president of an electronics company used to periodically go out to stores and work sales to get direct customer feedback about the product. Things that you don't get when you're sitting way up at top in the organization. Opening feedback channels where you can. Okay, now, having said that, we're talking about, so far, individual jobs, but jobs very often are done in teams, and that means that we really need to look at some additional things in terms of doing things for teams. It's not quite the same. Some things need to be considered. Okay, first of all, when we're talking about a team, what are the characteristics about a team? It has to be a real team. To be a real team, what it takes is that the team has to be doing some identifiable piece of work, and the team itself has to be an identifiable group. It's not just some loose collection of people who occasionally work on something. So we want a real team putting out a real product, okay? And we're talking also in this case really more about self-managing or autonomous work teams, because in that case there is autonomy built into it. If you got, people working on an assembly line are not really a team. You need all of them there to get the job done. But my concept of a team is a football team, an orchestra, or a surgical team. All people who have specific roles to fill, okay, and have to interact with each other. When we have those concepts in mind, what are the important behaviors that you want to encourage in the team? Well, first of all, we want members who are able to ask for ideas. If you're running low and you need help, you should be able to, and you should feel comfortable asking for ideas. And the other side of that is members who will give suggestions as to how to improve things. These are important behaviors in a successful team. And it takes a while for a team to gel, to feel as if they can give suggestions and ask for ideas, so they're comfortable doing that sort of thing. We want members who will listen to each other and share information. On a field, there's got to be a lot of communication between those players. And coaches are often yelling, talk to each other, talk to each other. Let people know what you see out there. Certainly in surgical teams, there has to be communication between what is going on so people know where things are at each step of the procedure. And if there's any anomaly, strange thing coming up, people have to inform the other people. Ways to improve things, problems that you see coming, that information has to be out there and it has to be shared. You can't harbor that stuff to yourself. And you have to listen to people, really listen to what they have to say. Okay, and so finally what we want is members who cooperate and collaborate in doing this. We don't want people to be competitive on a team. We want the whole team to be competitive, but not individual people being competitive, because if you're going to be competitive, it means you're going to hang on to information on your own. You're not going to listen. You're not going to give suggestions. So you are not going to be, essentially, a good team member if you're in competition with other people. It also changes the role of the manager in all of this. Because if it's a self-managing work team, this team is going to make decisions for itself. It's going to need to have feedback built into it. So what becomes the role of the manager? Well, if the job itself isn't somehow providing feedback and the manager can give feedback, that's the role of the manager. Or the manager helps change task conditions so that feedback comes along. Maybe we need to give this team more contact with customers, even if it's internal customers, so that they understand what's happening. And the manager has to be a coach to encourage people to make decisions on their own and to help members when conflict arises in teams to settle the various conflicts. So in part, the manager is part coach, imparting information, leading by example, and probably also part negotiator, mediator, because invariably you do get conflicts on teams. Somebody might want to be a star, okay? And you may have no room for stars on this team. That may be a problem, dealing with that. So that changes as well. So designing jobs for teams, you just can't say, okay, we're going to have a team now. You have to work with the team. Job design. A second key component in motivation is goal setting. What is it about goals that somehow motivate us? When we set a goal, particularly if we publicly announce that we're going to do something, we're likely to follow through on it, as opposed to those things that we hold to ourselves. You know all those New Year's resolutions that you make and you keep them in your head and you never keep them? The only place you keep them is in your head. And every year we go through and we make New Year's resolutions. There are ways that we want to change. But somehow we don't. These are not goals that are somehow inspiring us. So can goals inspire us to action? Yes. Do they? Yes. But what kinds of goals inspire us to action? Well, and why do they inspire us to action? Well, first of all, some things that we found out over years of doing research in a large variety of settings, that is, goals that are specific motivate us much better than goals that are vague. Okay? Oh, this is the year I'm going to exercise. Very vague, very vague. Don't do it. Okay? Give yourself some kind of plan. This is the year when, I'm going to sit down and make a plan, announce it, and then stick to it. Okay? And you've got to be specific about what you're going to do in terms of exercise. It might be, this is the year I'm going to join, I don't know, one of the workout clubs. Okay? And this is the year I'm going to get myself up early and work out. Now, sometimes you join and all you do is pay the fee and you don't go, and that's not working either. We'll talk about why that doesn't work. But specific goals, difficult goals also motivate better than goals that are not so difficult. Why do difficult goals motivate better? Because they give you something higher to shoot for. It's as simple as that. Set your goal low, you'll wind up low. Okay, want to end up higher? Set a difficult but achievable goal, okay? And with the difficult part, we have to then think about goal acceptance. You've got to accept the goal. The goal, you have to own that goal, whether it's given to you by management or whether you set the goal yourself. And as long as you accept the goal and you say, yeah, this is a reasonable goal, it doesn't really much matter whether you set the goal yourself or somebody gives the goal to you. Either way, it works. Team has a goal of winning each week that it goes out onto the field. Okay? That goal is not, it's one that's accepted by the players, but it's set higher up. And the same thing we'll see in organizations, that goals are set, strategic goals are set higher up, and then they're operationalized all the way down the line. But other people are setting those goals. So they just have to seem as if they're reasonable. And we'll look at what goes into goal acceptance. And finally, goal feedback. If goals are going to work, you have to know what progress you're making towards the goal, so you know how to adjust your own behavior so you can get there. So why do these work? Why do goals motivate? Well, first of all, they mobilize energy in relation to the goal. If you set a more difficult goal, it's going to mobilize more energy. And somehow the very act of setting a goal energizes us, gets us out there and doing something. It particularly focuses our attention on the activities that we need to engage in to reach a goal, helps us set priorities, and helps us ignore those things that would distract us from reaching a goal. Observe your own behavior as it gets to be around exam time and the time papers are due. There are a lot of distracting things that would ordinarily interest you that you just don't do at that point, like sleep, for instance, one of the things that you may let go by the wayside. And so you literally are more energetic at that time. Other social activities have to go by the wayside while you are achieving these goals that you have to reach that are coming up. So the distracting things you let go, and you catch up with the laundry and sleep later, while you work on achieving these very concrete goals that are in front of you. It also encourages the setting of action plans or strategies to reach the goal. Some goals are far out there in life. And so what you need to do is set sub-goals in order to get there. How are you going to achieve that? Weight Watchers is a wonderful example of helping people set sub-goals to achieve the final goal of how much weight they ultimately want to lose. So the setting of sub-goals and certain strategies, action plans to reach something. It encourages persistence until you reach the goal. Usually, unless the goal turns out to be really unobtainable, you stay with it and you keep working at it until you reach the goal and you achieve it. So all of these things help account for why goal setting works. Seems simple, okay? And it often seems to me that organizations in their United Way campaigns use these principles far more effectively than they do with their workers. Concrete goals are set. You know how much money you want to raise in the organization. Action plans are set. There are captains in every unit to help go around and help achieve this goal. There's that thermometer that you see, how far are you towards the goal? Now, to take all of that and somehow move it over to workers, how do you manage workers using goal setting? Well, not so complicated. Very often it's done with something called management by objectives or mutual goal setting. It exactly uses this, where workers sit down with supervisors at least once a year and work out mutually acceptable goals that key into higher level goals in the company. So this brings us to this notion. Is participation necessary? Do you have to participate in all of this? I already mentioned previously that as long as you see the goal as being reasonable, and the person who's giving it to you as having legitimate authority to hand you that goal, and you think no one's trying to pull a fast one on you, then you'll work as hard towards the goal that has been handed to you than one that you mutually work in terms of setting. But participation does become important in some instances. One is, particularly if you would set a higher goal for yourself than your supervisor would set for you. You kind of know what you're capable of. Maybe your supervisor doesn't have such a good handle on you, and you'd like more challenges than what you're getting out there. In that case, the mutual goal setting will be beneficial, and you should participate in it. The other case where it's really essential is where there is mistrust out there. in that case, it's important to have workers participate as well, because in that case, there will be more commitment to the goal, and the whole notion of commitment to goals, which is absolutely essential, is one, making it public, and two, accepting it. It's the goal that you own. Okay, the public aspect of it puts a little pressure on you to achieve it. It's harder to back away from goals that other people know about than the ones that you just carry around in your head. Rewards also help with goal acceptance, so that there is some bonus for achieving this. This is where we're going to go in just a moment in terms of linking pay to performance. This helps enhance goal acceptance and commitment. Some reward outside of the reward of just achieving the goal itself. You're helping the company benefit, you're helping the company achieve goals. It would be nice if the company shared in the profit it's realizing from all of the work that you're doing. And finally, supportiveness is important in doing this. Okay, you're going to need a manager who's going to help you get the resources together that you're going to need to achieve the goal. And when you run into difficulties in terms of trying to achieve these goals, of trying to help you get around these various difficulties. So all of these become important. If workers think that goals are being coerced on them, there's not going to be real goal acceptance. You're not going to meet goals in that case. So supportiveness and not coercion is the key in all of this. There are a few limitations. It sounds like it's wonderfully simple. Set the goals, the workers will be motivated, achieve them. Okay, a few limitations on all of this. Whoops. That's where we're going to go, so hold off on that overhead for a minute. If workers, again, don't have abilities and skills, doesn't matter what kind of goals you set. We've mentioned this every step of the way through motivation. It applies here no less. Workers need to have the abilities and skills in order to achieve the goals. So you have to know your workers in terms of setting goals, and you have to know their limitations and where they're going to need training. The other thing is, goal setting can really be distracting at early stages in learning complicated tasks. Better to learn the task without goal setting in place, because you're going to, while you're trying to learn this complicated task, keep thinking, I have to achieve this goal. And you're not going to learn the task as well. So in early stages of learning skills, don't put goals in place. Wait till the skills have been learned and then put the goals in place. Or have workers put the skills in place as a way of motivating. Okay, once the goals are in place, what do the goals help do? Help you allocate resources. Send you in search of feedback so you understand where you are in relation to the goal. All of those things that you need to do in order to succeed and get the job done. Okay. Whoops, let's back up. Money, 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 money. Does it work? Well, you're not going to work without pay, unless you're a volunteer, in which case you might work very well without pay. We have some people who work for instance, volunteer ambulance corps. Some people get paid for it. Those people who work as volunteers are every bit as skilled and probably more dedicated than those people who get paid for it. Suggests that maybe you can ruin motivation with pay. Is it possible? Yeah. You could lower intrinsic motivation, possibly with pay, when people come to see that they're doing the job only for the pay and not for the satisfaction of doing the job. So, can you use money as a motivator? And why is it sometimes so disappointing? You're paying these huge bucks and you're not getting performance out of people. You're really disappointed. What went wrong? Well, for individuals, okay, there are a couple of things that we want to look at. Incentives. For executives, you're going to give them different incentive packages than you're going to give people who are lower down in the organization. And the whole key to all of this is pay for performance. What kind of performance do you want? Link the pay to that. For executives, you're probably going to want to pay them for long-range performance, for product development, for looking for new markets, for all of those strategic kinds of things, that you bring in a very knowledgeable, a very experienced person. Link the pay to that. That probably is going to mean some kind of complicated stock option. Yes, you want some link to some current operations, but if you put too much of the compensation into currently what's going on in the organization, then people aren't going to look beyond the next quarter. And you want them to do that at upper levels of the organization. At lower levels, you're not going to reward so much for strategy and long-range performance, but you are going to reward for performance. How do you do that? Well, bonuses do that, merit pay does that, commissions do that, piecework does that. Each of these are examples of ways that you can reward people for their performance. Bonus or merit pay, you've done a really good job this year. You're going to get something in addition for doing a good job. But people have to understand what doing a good job means. It can't be this vague, unspecific goal that's out there. It has to be clear that certain things need to be achieved. Commissions directly tie people in. Now, based on sales performance, you're going to get a commission, as in real estate. Piecework has to do with you're paid for in assembly work for how many things you produce. So all of these things tie directly to performance. Incentives for groups, a little bit different. Okay, team incentives based on the performance of the group as a whole, and that's directly relied to the group's performance. Profit sharing, that relates to performance of the organization as a whole, where the organization has a profitable year, everybody gets a certain bonus based on whatever that profit has been for the year. Now, sometimes problem with profit sharing is people don't see how their own performance links directly to the profit that goes on. In fact, it could be that your unit didn't have such a good year, some other unit really did, you get the profits nonetheless. It's been a good year overall. Gain sharing is interesting. And that does tie in to performance, but you need to have a few things in place for that. You need to have some way for people to give suggestions into the system. So they suggest a way for work improvement. There needs to be trust in there between the workers and management, and you need to have some kind of financial incentive. So some new production way comes out of a team. And you have some way of tracking how this has cut costs. And the team then realizes some bonus based on how much costs have been cut by the new production method that has been suggested. Gain sharing, closer tie between pay and performance. Somewhat complicated. And finally, stock options. Stocks distributed to people. You don't get an immediate tangible benefit, but it does tie you into the company. You're now part owner because they're giving you stock in the company. Okay, this is not necessarily a panacea because people don't necessarily feel like owners, even though they do own stock in their own company. Why and where does pay fail to motivate? What are the problems here? Well, very often the merit pay or the bonus is too small. It's not worth it. You hardly notice it for all the effort that you put in. One of the problems that people make in terms of giving bonuses. Or there is no link between pay and performance. Years ago, an author by the name of Stephen Kerr wrote an article on the folly of rewarding A while hoping for B. You may be rewarding longevity on the job, seniority. What you're really hoping for is performance. Don't ever think you're going to get performance if what you're rewarding is longevity. It's not going to happen. If you want performance, reward performance. And companies may think they're rewarding performance, but they're really not. They're rewarding something else. You give somebody a huge signing bonus Okay? You think you're rewarding performance. What you've done is you've rewarded somebody for signing up with the team. What they have to do is show up. Well, then you hope that there's enough professional sense in there that the people will perform for pride. But you're not rewarding that. So don't expect that huge signing bonus to get somebody to perform. Okay. Performance appraisal is done poorly. So yeah, how can people improve their performance if everybody gets the same performance appraisal? And supervisors are avoiding it like the plague. Unions can have an impact on there. Unions don't usually like merit pay plans, maybe profit sharing. But profit sharing, it's hard to ascertain the link between pay and performance. So that may have an effect, and it may be monetarily better for somebody to stay in a union job than to move into a non-union job. So that could have an impact as well. And something called adaptation problems, where you get merit pay and it adds into the base of your salary. You know, at the end of a year, it's really going to be the next merit pay that gives you incentive because you've adapted to your salary being that high already. Once you get it, it's the incentive of merit pay that moves you along. And once it adds into the base of your salary, you adapt to that. You say, yeah, this is what I'm worth. It ceases to have motivational value and incentive value, and it's really next year's merit pay that does it. So you have to keep adding in merit pay. A one-shot bonus isn't going to do it. You have to keep those incentives in there year after year and give people something to shoot for. So you have to have these things in place. How do you make the plans work? One, you want high performance? Set high goals for performance. Don't set them down low. You have to have accurate ways of measuring performance. That's key to what you do. You're rewarding performance, you've got to be able to measure performance so you know who's performing well and who isn't. And that means that you've got to have good performance appraisal systems. And you've got to train supervisors to do this and do it really well so that they can give good feedback, so that they can discern between their excellent workers, the average workers, and the poor workers. And train them to give feedback. I know it involves confrontation. Anybody can give an excellent worker feedback. Giving a poor worker feedback is more problematic. Link pay to performance, essential, and make increases noticeable and meaningful. I think that's a wrap for today, folks. Okay, I'll bring this up so we can be on the screen, and we're out of here. Oh boy, I should have the mic up.